The Qatar Open is officially in full meltdown mode, and we need to talk about it because what's happening right now is absolutely wild. Aryna Sabalenka, the world number one, the runner-up from the Australian Open just days ago, has officially pulled out of the tournament. And she's not alone. Big names are dropping from this event like flies, and the whole thing is basically falling apart before it even starts. We're talking about a complete implosion of what was supposed to be one of the premier tournaments on the women's tennis calendar. The draw is being scrambled, players who were supposed to be in qualifying are suddenly in the main draw, and tournament organizers have got to be absolutely panicking right now. This isn't how a major WTA event is supposed to go down, but here we are watching it happen in real time. So buckle up, because we're about to dive into why everyone's bailing on Doha, what Sabalenka really said after her heartbreaking Australian Open loss, and what this means for the absolute chaos that is the WTA calendar. Let's start with the bombshell announcement that kicked off this entire mess. Aryna Sabalenka just announced she's pulling out of the Qatar Open, which is actually a pretty big deal when you consider she won the whole thing back in 2020. That was her debut in Doha, and she absolutely dominated, claiming the title in spectacular fashion. You'd think that would create some kind of loyalty or special connection to the event, right? But apparently not. Apparently, winning a tournament 6 years ago doesn't obligate you to show up when you're exhausted and emotionally destroyed from losing a Grand Slam final. And here's the kicker. Sabalenka is absolutely not alone in this decision. The Qatar Open is getting absolutely hammered by withdrawals from top players across the board. We're talking about a systematic destruction of what was supposed to be a stacked tournament. IGA Swiatek is now the top seed, but only because the original top seed bailed. World number 6 Jessica Pegula pulled out. Naomi Osaka decided to skip the entire Middle East swing altogether. Madison Keys withdrew. Barbora Krejcikova is out. The injury list just keeps growing and growing with players like Marketa Vondrousova stepping away to recover. Leylah Fernandez, who's supposed to be a French Open favorite, hasn't even started her season yet. At this point, you have to genuinely ask, what's even left of this tournament? They are basically filling the main draw with players who were supposed to be grinding it out in qualifying rounds. Alexandra Ila, Emiliana Arango, Doria Kasatkina, Anastasia Pavlyuchenkova, and Kristina Buxa all got moved into the main draw because so many top players decided they'd rather be literally anywhere else. That's not how a premier WTA event is supposed to work. You shouldn't be scrambling at the last minute to fill your main draw spots because half your seeded players decided the tournament isn't worth their time or energy. This isn't some small 250 level tournament that nobody cares about. This is supposed to be one of the marquee events on the Middle East swing, and it's turning into what basically amounts to a B-team showcase. Now let's talk about Sabalenka's stated reasoning for pulling out, because on the surface it sounds totally reasonable. She says she needs to rest after the Australian Open. She just played in the final against Elena Rybakina and lost in what was apparently a pretty brutal match both mentally and physically. She walked away with over £1 million for making the final, which is obviously nice, but she also walked away needing some serious recovery time. So instead of jumping straight into another grueling tournament, she's taking a break and planning to come back for the Dubai Championships. That sounds perfectly reasonable on the surface, right? Professional athletes need rest, especially after going deep in a Grand Slam tournament and fighting through 2 weeks of brutal matches. But here's where it gets really interesting, and this is where you have to read between the lines a little bit. Sabalenka isn't defending significant ranking points at the Qatar Open this year anyway. Her best result there was winning it back in 2020, but her performances since then have been pretty underwhelming. So strategically, this withdrawal makes total sense from a rankings perspective. Why grind through a tournament where you're not defending much when you could rest up and be fresh for events that actually matter to your ranking and your bottom line? But let's dive deeper into Sabalenka's mindset coming out of the Australian Open, because she was surprisingly and refreshingly candid about the whole experience in ways that most elite athletes never are. In her post-match press conference after losing to Rybakina, she didn't give you the usual polished champion talk. She didn't hold back. She admitted straight up that Rybakina played an incredible match and that she tried her absolute best, but it just wasn't enough. She said she had opportunities and feels like she missed a couple of them, but that's just tennis. One day you're the loser, the next day you're the winner. Then she added this absolute gem of a quote that shows you exactly where her head is at. Hopefully I'll be more of a winner this season than a loser. Hoping right now and praying. Let that sink in for a second. The world number one is literally saying she hopes she wins more than she loses this year and she's praying about it. That's not the usual confident champion talk you hear from elite athletes who are supposed to project strength and dominance at all times. That's someone who just got their heart absolutely broken in a Grand Slam final and is trying desperately to process it and find some way forward. When asked about reviewing her Australian Open performance with her team, Sabalenka's response was even more brutally honest. She said she initially wasn't sure when she'd be ready to watch it back and joked with her agent, saying, "Maybe in a week or maybe in a few days, whenever I feel like okay I can move on from this one." She described herself as alternating between laughing and crying, calling it a hysterical moment that wasn't really productive at all. She was just letting everything out, all the emotions and frustration and disappointment. She was upset with herself because once again she had opportunities but played great until a certain point and then couldn't resist the sheer aggression that Rybakina was bringing. But then she caught herself mid-spiral and tried to find something positive. She said overall she played great tennis in Australia and even in the final she feels like she played great and did her absolute best. Today Rybakina was just the better player. Simple as that. And here's the part that really shows you what elite athletes go through mentally that the public never sees. Sabalenka said, and I quote, "We'll speak with the team now, how they try to avoid me because it's not really healthy to be around me right now." That's self-awareness right there. That's honesty. She knows she's in a terrible headspace and she's actively warning everyone around her to give her some space because she's not fit for human interaction at the moment. This level of transparency is pretty rare in professional tennis, where most players give you the standard scripted lines about learning from this and coming back stronger. Sabalenka is out here telling you she's crying, laughing hysterically, emotionally unstable, and that her own team is actively avoiding her because she's unbearable to be around. That's real. That's what actually happens when you lose a Grand Slam final after fighting your way through 2 weeks of absolutely brutal matches. So when you look at it through that lens, her pulling out of Qatar makes even more sense. The woman is emotionally destroyed and physically exhausted. She needs genuine time to process what happened in Melbourne and get her head right before she steps back onto a tennis court. Playing another high-pressure tournament just 1 week later when you're still in that kind of mental and emotional headspace is honestly a recipe for disaster. But here's where my skepticism kicks in, and I think this is worth examining. Isn't it awfully convenient that she's only pulling out of a tournament where she's not defending major points and where she hasn't performed particularly well in recent years? If this was Indian Wells or Miami or some other massive event where she had serious points to defend, would she still be taking this mental health break? Or would she magically find the strength and motivation to push through and compete? I'm not saying she's faking anything here. Burnout and mental exhaustion are very real things in professional sports, and we should absolutely take players at their word when they say they need a break. But it's also undeniably true that players are getting increasingly strategic about which tournaments they play and which ones they conveniently skip. The tennis calendar is absolutely packed. You literally cannot play everything without destroying your body and your mind. So you pick the events that matter most to your ranking, your sponsors, your prize money, and your legacy. Everything else becomes optional. The Qatar Open is clearly in that optional category for a lot of players right now. Between the timing coming right after the Australian Open, the location requiring long exhausting travel to the Middle East, and the fact that it falls right before Dubai, which is a bigger and more prestigious event, it's easy to see why players are choosing to skip Doha this year. The tournament organizers have got to be absolutely panicking right now. Think about it from their perspective. They sold tickets and promoted this event based on having the top women's players in the world competing in Doha. Now their top seed is someone who only got there because literally everyone else withdrew. Their draw is filled with players that most casual fans have never even heard of. The marquee matchups they were hoping for and promoting aren't going to happen because half the marquee players aren't even showing up. From a fan perspective, this has to be incredibly frustrating. You buy tickets months in advance expecting to see Sabalenka, Pegula, Osaka, and all these other huge stars competing at the highest level. Then one by one they all pull out and you're left watching a tournament that feels more like a challenger event than a premier WTA competition. Some fans might legitimately want refunds at that point, and honestly, who could blame them? Iga Swiatek stepping up as the new top seed is interesting. She's the world number 2 and arguably the most dominant player on tour right now, and with Sabalenka and half the other top players out, Swiatek's path to the title in Doha just opened up significantly. She's got to be looking at this draw thinking this is a golden opportunity to rack up some relatively easy ranking points and prize money without having to face the absolute toughest competition. But even that feels kind of hollow, doesn't it? Winning a tournament because everyone else withdrew isn't quite the same as beating them head-to-head in brutal 3-set battles and proving you're the best player there. Sure, you get the trophy and the points and the prize money, but there's always going to be an asterisk in people's minds. Oh yeah, Swiatek won Qatar, but Sabalenka and Pegula and Osaka weren't even there. The players getting moved into the main draw should be genuinely excited, though. Players like Alexandra Ela and Doria Kasatkina and Kristina Buxa are getting an unexpected chance to compete at a level they might not have reached through standard qualifying. This could legitimately be a career-making opportunity for some of them. A deep run in a premier event, even one that's been depleted by withdrawals, can change your ranking, your confidence, and your whole trajectory as a professional player. Sabalenka's plan is to rest up and come back for the Dubai Championships, which is a bigger deal than Qatar in terms of both prestige and prize money. Dubai is a WTA 1000 event versus Qatar's 500 level. So again, strategically, it makes total sense to skip the smaller tournament and be fresh for the bigger one. She's not abandoning the Middle East swing entirely. She's just being selective about where she spends her limited energy. What this whole situation really exposes is the fundamental gap between what fans want and what players actually need. Fans want to see the best players competing at every tournament, giving maximum effort, creating amazing matches and compelling storylines. Players want to have long healthy careers, stay physically sound, win the tournaments that matter most, and make as much money as possible while doing it. Those two goals don't always align, and that's the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to acknowledge. The WTA desperately needs to figure out how to make the calendar more player-friendly, or this is going to keep happening over and over. Tournaments are going to keep getting absolutely gutted by withdrawals because players are burned out, injured, and mentally exhausted. They need to either spread events out more, reduce the number of mandatory tournaments, or increase the prize money across the board so players have more genuine incentive to show up even when they're not feeling 100%. So there you have it. Aryna Sabalenka pulled out of the Qatar Open along with half the other top players, and now the tournament is basically a free-for-all for whoever actually bothered to show up. If you think situations like this are going to keep happening until the WTA fundamentally fixes their calendar, smash that like button right now. Drop a comment and let me know. Would you still buy tickets to a tournament knowing half the stars might withdraw at the last minute? And make sure you're subscribed with notifications on because we're going to keep covering all the drama and chaos in women's tennis. Until